All right, so let's dive into this whole TikTok thing. It seems like we've got a ton of stuff to cover here. News, legal analyses, even some pretty heated discussions on social media.
Yeah.
Seems like everyone's got an opinion on this ban.
Yeah, and for good reason. This whole situation brings up some really big questions
Yeah.
about national security, free speech, and, the power dynamics between governments and these big tech
Right.
companies.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so for anyone who hasn't been glued to the news 24/7, the Supreme Court just upheld this law that could basically force TikTok out of the U.S. What's the deadline on that again?
January 19th, so just 2 days away. Basically, TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, they have to sell their stake in the app to an American company or face a nationwide ban.
Wow, so it's really coming down to the wire.
Yeah.
And the government's main argument for the ban is national security, right? They're worried about the Chinese government getting access to user data.
Yeah, that's their main justification. They're pointing to China's national security laws, which could force ByteDance to hand over user data. There's also the concern about content manipulation, the possibility of them using TikTok to influence American public opinion.
Okay, but here's what I don't get. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even Google, they all collect tons of data on us too. So why is TikTok being singled out? Is this really about security or is there something else going on here?
Yeah, a lot of people are asking that same question. Facebook, for example, they have a pretty long history of data privacy scandals. Remember Cambridge Analytica?
Oh yeah, how could I forget that one?
Right. They took data from millions of Facebook users without their consent and then used it for targeted political advertising.
Exactly. And let's not forget about all those targeted ads that follow us around the internet. After you look at something online,
Yeah.
it's like they're reading our minds.
It can definitely feel that way.
It seems like data collection and even data sales are happening all the time on all these platforms. So why the sudden outrage over TikTok?
It's a good point. The selective targeting of TikTok by the government. It's led to a lot of accusations of hypocrisy, especially since similar data collection practices are happening across the entire tech industry.
And to be honest, Congress hasn't exactly been rushing to regulate Facebook or Instagram either. I've even seen reports that suggest certain members of Congress actually have financial interests in Meta, Facebook's parent company.
Right, well, that definitely raises some eyebrows. It adds another layer of complexity to this whole debate. Is this really about national security concerns, or are there political and economic motivations at play here?
It's starting to feel like we're all pawns in some kind of bigger geopolitical game.
Yeah, the timing of the ban is interesting too. It's happening at a time when tensions between the US and China are escalating on multiple fronts, from trade disputes to technological competition.
So maybe this TikTok ban is less about data security and more about trying to contain China's growing influence in the tech world.
It's definitely a possibility. Some people argue that this ban is part of a larger economic and geopolitical strategy aimed at stopping the rise of Chinese tech companies.
And what about the argument that this ban is actually infringing on free speech rights? Millions of Americans use TikTok to express themselves, build communities, even make a living.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. Some legal experts are saying that the ban could be seen as a violation of the First Amendment. The one that protects freedom of speech and assembly. They point out that the government hasn't really provided any concrete evidence of TikTok being used to spread misinformation or harm national security.
So are we sacrificing our digital freedoms in the name of security? And if the government can ban TikTok today, what's to stop them from targeting other platforms tomorrow?
That's the slippery slope argument. If they can justify banning a platform based on vague national security concerns, without providing any real evidence, then any platform could become a target.
It's kind of a scary thought, isn't it? And I have to say, it seems like the public is starting to catch on to these inconsistencies. There's this growing feeling of, wait a minute, why is TikTok the bad guy here when everyone else is doing the same thing?
It's true. We're seeing a shift in public perception. More and more people are questioning the government's motives and pointing out the double standards in how they're approaching data privacy. People are asking why target TikTok when other platforms, especially those based in the US, have similar, if not more concerning issues.
Yeah, this isn't just some abstract debate about data privacy and national security. This ban has real consequences, especially for small businesses and content creators who rely on TikTok to make a living.
Absolutely. For a lot of small businesses, TikTok is their main platform for reaching customers, building their brand, and making sales.
And for content creators, TikTok is more than just an app. It's a creative outlet, a community, and for some, their entire career. This ban could completely wipe out their income.
We could be talking about millions of jobs lost and billions of dollars in revenue gone, the economic impact would be huge, especially for those who have invested heavily in TikTok as their main platform.
And what about the argument that there are plenty of other platforms out there? Can't everyone just move to Instagram Reels or something?
Well, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
Each platform has its own unique features, audience, and algorithms. TikTok has built a specific culture and community that's hard to replicate elsewhere.
Right. It's not just about switching apps. It's about losing a whole community and way of connecting with people.
Exactly.
And, I've heard that some Americans are actually migrating to Chinese social media apps in protest, like Xiaohongshu or Red. They're basically saying if the government is going to ban a Chinese app over data privacy, then they might as well join one to show that it's not really about security at all.
Yeah, it's a fascinating development. It shows how this issue is really resonating with people.
And the vast majority seem to be spreading out to other platforms. But not Meta. It's like they sending a message.
It seems like they are making a statement.
So what does this all mean for the future of TikTok in the US? Is there any chance of a last-minute reprieve? Or is this the end of the road?
Well, it's still a very fluid situation. There's a lot of back and forth political maneuvering and legal challenges happening.
Sounds like it's going to be a wild ride these next few days.
Definitely. And regardless of what happens to TikTok, this whole thing has really exposed some deep tensions and contradictions in how we approach data privacy, online freedom, and the power of big tech.
It's definitely a wake-up call for all of us. But before we get into the bigger picture implications, let's dig deeper into the specifics of data collection and how it differs between platforms like TikTok and Facebook.
Yeah, let's unpack that next. So let's dig into how these tech giants actually collect data. You mentioned that Facebook and other platforms gather tons of data. What kind of information are we talking about here?
Well, it goes way beyond just our names and email addresses. These companies track practically everything we do online. Our browsing history, our search queries, our location data, even our personal messages.
Exactly. They built these incredibly detailed profiles of us, tracking our interests, our habits, even our emotional states. And all of this information is incredibly valuable, especially for targeted advertising.
Yeah, it's those ads that seem to know exactly what we're thinking about buying before we even do.
Yeah.
It's kind of impressive and creepy at the same time. But you said Facebook's practices are different from TikTok's. How so?
Well, the types of data they collect might be similar, but the key difference is how that data is used and who has potential access to it. Facebook has a long history of sharing user data with third-party apps and advertisers.
Right, like that whole Cambridge Analytica thing?
Exactly. That was a prime example. They basically took Facebook data and used it to try and influence voters.
And although Facebook has made some changes to their privacy settings since then, there are still a lot of concerns about how they collect and use our data. So what about TikTok? What are they doing with our data that's so different?
The main concern with TikTok is the potential for the Chinese government to access that data. China's national security laws could force ByteDance to hand over user data, even without users knowing or consenting.
So it's not so much about the type of data being collected, but more about who might be able to get their hands on it.
Exactly. It's a matter of trust and transparency. While Facebook has its own privacy issues, at least they're subject to U.S. laws and regulations, with TikTok, there's just a lack of transparency about how data is handled and who might have access to it.
And that's what makes people nervous. They don't know if their data is being used to target them with ads, or if it's ending up in the hands of a foreign government.
Right. That uncertainty creates a lot of anxiety and distrust around TikTok.
But I still keep coming back to this hypocrisy issue. We're freaking out about TikTok, but we're totally fine with Facebook and Google tracking our every move. It feels like a double standard.
Yeah, it's a valid point. And it points to a larger conversation we need to have about data privacy in general. It's not just about one app or one country. It's about setting clear standards and regulations for all tech companies that collect and use our data.
Right. It seems like we're focusing on the symptom, which is TikTok, instead of addressing the root cause, which is the massive amount of data collection and potential misuse happening across the entire tech industry.
It's a great analogy. This TikTok ban could be a catalyst for a broader conversation about data privacy, but only if we look beyond the specific case and address the bigger systemic issues at play.
Okay, so what are some of those systemic issues?
Well, for starters, we need to rethink the current business model of a lot of these tech companies, which relies heavily on data collection and targeted advertising.
Right, because that's how they make their money.
Yeah.
By knowing everything about us and then selling that information to advertisers.
Exactly. But that model comes at a cost to our privacy and potentially our autonomy.
So what's the alternative? How do we create a digital world where we can enjoy technology without sacrificing our privacy?
That's the million-dollar question. There are a lot of ideas being thrown around: stricter data privacy regulations, more transparency from tech companies, even exploring alternative business models that don't rely so heavily on data collection.
It feels like we're at a crossroads. We can either keep going down this path of unchecked data collection, or we can demand something better, something that puts user privacy and control over data first.
It's a choice we have to make as a society. And this TikTok ban, however controversial it is, has at least forced us to start asking these questions.
So let's say this ban goes through and TikTok disappears from the US. What happens next? Do we just move on to the next trendy app? Or could this be a turning point for digital freedom?
Well, it's tough to say what the future holds,
Neurotic.
but I do think this whole situation has sparked a sense of awareness and activism among users.
You mean people are starting to realize they have a say in how their data is used
Mhm.
and what kind of digital world they want to live in?
Exactly, and that's where the real power lies.
Okay, so we need to be more aware, more vocal, and more proactive about protecting our digital rights. But what are some practical steps we can take?
Well, that's a conversation we can explore further.
So we've talked about the hypocrisy and the economic fallout, and even the potential threat to free speech.
Yeah.
But let's get practical here. What can we as everyday users actually do to protect our data and make sure the digital world is a little more ethical?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, these huge tech companies, these complex government policies. But there are things we can do both individually and collectively to make a difference.
Okay, give us some hope here. What can we do?
First and foremost, we need to be informed. Don't just passively consume information. Be critical of what you see online, especially on social media.
So, like, fact check those viral posts and be wary of clickbait headlines.
Exactly. Question your sources, get your news from different places, and always be aware of potential biases.
Okay, so be smart about where we get our news.
Yeah.
What else?
Get involved in the political process. Contact your representatives and tell them what you think about data privacy, free speech, and the power of these big tech companies.
Right. Make our voices heard. We can also support organizations that are fighting for digital rights and advocate for policies that actually protect our interests.
Absolutely. There's power in numbers. When we join forces with others who share our concerns, we can really make a difference and influence those in power.
And what about the choices we make on a daily basis? Do those actually matter?
They definitely matter. Be mindful of the apps you use, the data you share, the websites you visit. Think before you click. Every choice we make online leaves a trace, and it sends a message to the market.
So we're not just passive consumers of technology. We actually have some control over what happens.
Exactly. We can choose to support companies that align with our values, companies that prioritize privacy and promote ethical data practices. We can vote with our wallets and our downloads.
Yeah, it's about making conscious choices. Maybe this whole TikTok drama is a wake-up call.
I think it is. It's a reminder that we can't just assume our digital freedoms will always be there. We need to be proactive about protecting our privacy, holding tech companies accountable, and creating a digital future that actually reflects our values.
This whole conversation has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Good. The goal is to leave you with more questions than answers.
And a feeling of knowing that we're not just bystanders in all of this.
Exactly. The future is being written right now, and we all have a role to play in shaping it.
Well, on that note, thanks for diving deep with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, remember, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. The future of our digital lives depends on it.